Hopefully by now you've had a chance to look at the AWF's grading and qualifying scheme for 2020. The biggest changes here are to both senior nationals and the Australian Open. This video is going to be an overview of the changes, what we might expect at the national level. We haven't had an Australian Open for a year now, so I won't talk too much about that, but I will talk about potential implications of this, as well as my opinions and musings at the end of the video. Guys, if I screw anything up, or if you have any thoughts or comments on this video, please leave them below, because that's how we start this discussion about what's sort of going on. Just a bit of background before we begin. In the past, the Australian Open has had a much lower entry total than it does now. It's been around G grade for girls and F grade for boys. The changes we see to the Australian Open now are that the qualification is the same as senior nationals, and it's gone all the way up to a D grade, which is a massive, I guess it's 4 standards up. For senior nationals, the qualifications used to be E grade for boys and F grade for girls. And now that they both are at D grade, that's a 1 standard up for the boys and 2 standards up for the girls. This year, we had 139 athletes compete at the senior national level. If we take into account their finishing totals and match that up against where the qualification totals are currently, we will have drastically less athletes compete. I'd like you guys to note that I'm not meshing them together by their entry totals, which could be a lot higher. I'm just going by where they finished at the national level. So if we do that, we go from 139 athletes all the way down to 39. We go from 69 girls competing all the way down to 12 girls competing. And we go from 63 men all the way down to 23 men. So I'm going to just pull up some notes here for you guys. We generally don't have anyone in the lightest weight categories. I think they're kind of silly categories anyway. But in the second lightest category, we had 3 girls compete in the 49s. This will drop down to 0, none of them being able to qualify. We had 7 in the 55s, that'll go down to 1. 15 in the 59s, which will go down to 2. 14 in the 64s, which will go down to 1. 16 in the 71s, which will go down to 6. 5 athletes as a 76, that'll go down to 0. 4 athletes as 81s, which will go down to 1. 3 athletes in the 87s, which will go down to 1. And then 2 athletes in the 87 plus, which will go down to 0. For the men, we have, again, 0 athletes in the 55s, which is kind of standard. In the 61s, we had 1 athlete, that'll go down to 0. 5 athletes in the 67s, which will go down to 1. 7 athletes in the 73s, which will go down to 4. 15 athletes in the 81s, which will go down to 5. 11 athletes in the 89s, which will go down to 5. 7 athletes in the 96s, which will go down to 3. 7 athletes in the 102s, which will go down to 3. 5 athletes in the 109s, which will go down to 2. And 5 athletes in the 109 pluses, which will also go down to 4. In Australia, we have athletes competing at a whole bunch of different levels. We have elite athletes vying for that top spot at events like the Olympics, Worlds, Commonwealth Games. And then we have athletes trying to break into that sphere. So athletes competing at things like Oceanias and the Pacific Games. Then we have athletes competing at a national level, and then athletes competing generally at that middle ground, which used to be what the Australian Open was. Finally, we have athletes trying to qualify for things like states and bridging into the Australian Open. And lastly, we have athletes trying to qualify at a state level. Interspersed in all of this are athletes of different age categories. So we have youth, junior, under 23s, as well as masters athletes. And they're sprinkled in between, and they're all very important as well. From a business standpoint, we have a bunch of stakeholders in the AWF. Things like government bodies, ASADA, the IOC, companies that provide sponsorship, the Commonwealth Games committees, the states, the athletes, the coaches, educators, the list goes on and on. As a sport though, government funding is dictated by how we place at a high level event. Things like the Olympics and Commonwealth Games. Sports are a way for countries to exert geopolitical power over other countries. It's kind of like showing up to show and tell with your athlete and being like, hey, my athlete is better than yours, and because of that, my country is better than yours. The rest of the money that the AWF get is probably from a mix of coaching courses as well as memberships derived from the states. So we have two things to take into account. One is that there is probably immense pressure for the AWF to perform at a high level. And this is why we're quick to adopt new athletes into the sport from other sports, other countries, and other places. It really does help our sport survive. The second is that we probably need a better structure for the AWF to survive, mainly because this sport is in dire need of help. We might not make it into the next Olympics just because of doping and all the other political stuff that's going on at the broader IOC level. And I think that will greatly affect the sports funding within Australia as well. It's possible that this is the reason for the AWF to make this change, as it allows one big push leading into 2024 before we possibly lose our position as a sport within the Olympics. But if we're thinking about long-term development of both athletes, coaches, clubs, and even the development of the sport within Australia, I think we need to look at driving participation upwards. And that's why I think this is a step backwards rather than a step forwards. I really have no problems with the totals going up, but there needs to be more high-level competitions that provide stepping stones to gamify the sport better, because that's how we drive participation. It's just like a video game. You have levels, and as you get through those levels, then you get higher and higher into the ranks. To be honest, all of this could probably be solved if we separated the Australian Open from the Australian International into two events, one having a much lower entry total, and then we could still drive participation through all levels. My prediction, however, is that this won't happen, and we might see a much lower participation in the sport next year. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and if I've missed something, again, please just comment below and let me know. Guys, I want to start this conversation because I think it's really interesting. Anytime the sport changes is an interesting affair, and I want to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks a lot for watching, guys, and good luck qualifying for nationals.